Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Fine-Tuning Your CDI Program. I'm Morgan Hafner with Becker's Hospital Review. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. We're looking forward to hearing your questions. Today's session is being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's webinar to access the recording. At this time, it is now my pleasure to start today's webinar by introducing our presenters. Catherine Vermillion is the Senior Director of Clinical Documentation Improvement for Ensemble Health Partners. In this role, Catherine serves as an operational leader with direct oversight and management of CDI and clinical appeals teams for several facilities within their clients' organizations. She has a Master's of Science degree in nursing with a specialization in informatics and holds 2 CDI-specific certifications, Certified Clinical Documentation Specialist and Clinical Documentation Improvement Practitioner. She is a registered nurse with a very clinical background with experiences med-surg, critical care, emergency, and administration. Allison Bolick is the AVP of Clinical Documentation Improvement for Ensemble Health Partners, currently supporting Bon Secours Mercy Health. Allison successfully oversees 29 acute care facilities, continually striving for operational improvement, and researches and applies best practice measures for DRG optimization and quality assurance. She is instrumental in maintaining streamlined processes and expectations across multiple states and facilities. She has a strong focus on leadership, teamwork, and interdisciplinary collaborative development. Allison has over 19 years of nursing experience at a Level 1 trauma center, with more than 7 years dedicated to documentation improvement, physician engagement, and education. At this time, I'm pleased to turn the floor over to Allison to begin today's presentation.
Thank you, Morgan, and thank you everyone for joining our presentation on fine-tuning your CDI program. We feel this is an important topic to move departments beyond just the basics. As we know, there is always opportunity for improvement, and we hope to shed some light on areas of opportunity and where that can be found. As Morgan stated, I'm Allison Bolick, and then my co-presenter is Catherine Vermillion. Our objectives for today are to describe a successful leadership structure, review an explanation of data analysis and how to make it meaningful, as well as get an operational view of KPIs to keep your program on target. Note these are our opinions based on industry experience, and they may vary based on the size and needs of your organization. We will start with a successful leadership structure. While many already have this in place to start, it may not always be the case, or there may be opportunity to improve upon the structure already set in place. The importance of outlining this is that it further solidifies a foundation that is necessary to leverage and maintain a successful program. Let's look first at an example leadership hierarchy. This example is representative of a large system oversight and may vary in relation to your organization. Starting from the bottom up, first there is the on-site CDI teams. This is where it all happens, to make or break a department's success. There are numerous variations to a CDI team staffing model. This may be seen as a fully on-site model, a fully off-site model, and risks associated with that are losing the engagement with all departments and that has been previously built with providers. Or what I would say is the most beneficial model, and that is seen in a hybrid staffing model, in which teams rotate both on and off-site. This allows the ability to remain visible as part of that care continuum, as well as maintain staff engagement while allowing teams to work some remote days. Moving next on the hierarchy is a site supervisor. I like to describe the on-site supervisor as really the face of CDI. This is who the teams, site administration, and providers alike rely on and often seek out. They are ultimately the subject matter experts of that particular site and carry a lot of responsibility. In turn, a regional manager is listed next. This regional approach allows for continued manageability of CDI needs that can bring forth successes as well as barriers from other sites to play off of one another. This eliminates the silo effect that many facility-based departments fall into, in which all departments, in a sense, develop blinders to anything happening outside of their department or their facility. This managerial regional-based approach brings forth expertise of the region, but also allows that manager for varied visibility in order to work with multiple sites based on their needs. A focus may be on one facility as opposed to another, or bringing forward other ideas from one facility and sharing between the two. This is the first step of leadership in overall system standardization. Standardization is an attempt to streamline expectations across an organization. There will certainly be variances between facilities, but the more in line an organization can be, the easier it is to reach the same end goal. Next listed is a director, along with an educator and an analyst. The luxury of these positions is their dedication to CDI specifically, and their focus that lies within the roles. The educator is just that. He or she has the ability to build onboarding processes and education that can be used across the organization, as well as act as a system-wide resource. This is the same with our analyst. He or she is able to generate reports that are being utilized for one site that then can be duplicated across the organization. This again assists with that system standardization mentioned earlier. Ensuring all reporting is in line and all are receiving the same information is important. Historically, many organizations rely on their vendors for monthly or quarterly or annual reporting. A dedicated analyst can keep teams up to speed by assisting with daily, weekly, monthly, as well as annual trends that may need further inquiry. Catherine will go into further detail about this later. Not listed here is a physician advisor, but they're important to the CDI success as well. This may be seen in your specific hierarchy itself or a separate job function within another provider role. This could be the CMO of the facility, a hospitalist lead, or just a dedicated CDI champion that is competent in overall CDI. They assist teams on that peer-to-peer level when necessary. They have that in, if you will, that other providers rely on where CDI department may fall short of. Developing such a structure builds upon that foundation that most CDI departments start with, but then allow it to move to a next level. It's important to recognize that a system CDI department is not a one-man show. This allows CDI teams to work together to be proactive instead of reactive. Many sites have good bones, and it's just building it from there to make it even better. An analogy would be putting the siding and a roof on a house for completion. Without that, the framework itself will not support the end goals of that house build. The oversight allows for clear-cut expectations. No longer is CDI viewed as a behind-the-scenes department. We should be upfront and personal at the facility as well as the system level with productivity and quality expectations. Site and system KPIs in which everyone plays a part in achieving. Along with expectations is the ability for team building. This can be accomplished at the site, regional, as well as the system level. It allows all teams to learn from each other and not become siloed as we noted previously. It also eliminates the need to recreate the wheel. What can we glean from each other to improve upon for continued success? What are some provider engagement ideas, presentation ideas, overall team education? The best part in standardization approach is to have some fun along the way. Who says you can't have fun engaging providers with necessary education? This also builds team spirit, and everyone will be knocking on the door to be part of your CDI team. Focusing further on on-site expectations, let's separate that out a little bit and discuss further what we mean. Ultimately, if you're keeping up to date with weekly and daily expectations, there should be no surprises at the end of the month, and monthly reports will be clean. This in turn takes those oftentimes retrospective reviews or deep dives and turns them more into a concurrent focus. Starting with daily expectations. One item outlined here are daily huddles. These help initially outline the day. It gives a quick look for the teams to look at volumes and individual workloads, identify any outstanding open queries and doc needs, as well as that quick touch base for any team questions or case reviews that would benefit by reviewing as a team on a whole. Also touching on the organization and facility specific updates. Is there any news that needs to be shared with that individual team? Any new buildings, any service line changes that are being discussed, any doc physician changes? Those are all important to keep on top of on an ongoing basis. Rounding with the teams and team building, if done daily, can again build that face value within the facility. We want to be sought out as an important department that everyone is looking to help solve problems. Along with those daily problems, we also know that there are fires that pop up throughout the day, such as staffing issues, increase or decrease in census, and how are we going to go about addressing those. Being prepared to take those on and being able to address those timely is a daily goal. Looking at weekly expectations, again, this is a way to ensure that there are no surprises at the end of the month. Keeping up to date where we are month to date with those metrics and KPIs. Is there anything to look into? One thing that we recommend is doing concurrent audits on cases to make sure that we're not then in turn doing retrospective audits, moving things more to a proactive instead of reactive approach. Looking at weekly summaries to be provided to leadership. Again, this keeps all parties up to date on where we are looking on a weekly trend, a monthly trend, and those sorts of things. Being involved in ancillary meetings, as well as identifying opportunities for physician and team education is important. This again goes into that moving from behind the scenes and getting your CDI program out on front. Looking at monthly expectations, the first item outlined here is executive steering reports. These are reports pulled together monthly for administrative review. They can be reviewed both internally within the CDI department as well as the C-suite executives. Katie will go into some reporting expectations later on in the presentation. Some of those reporting analytics are important to keep on top of. Are these what we expected to be the outcome of that month? Are there any surprises? If there are any surprises, how can we then get in front of those the following month so we're not working reactively? Pulling in individual and team metric reviews. Again, this is a team sport. Looking at productivity and quality assurance, isolating those initiatives and making sure all are playing a part in the overall end goal. Monthly expectations also then allow for the continual strategizing on different focus areas. What may be a focus one month can completely change and be different than the following month. Again, looking for those opportunities for continued success is important. Now let's review communication needs and its importance. CDI communicates with many departments. Coding is often thought of as number one, but also involving quality, case management. Such departments as dietary and nursing are some examples. While we work in tandem and most closely with coding, allow me to touch on the other areas a little bit further. Quality is an important department to keep in collaboration with, as we can identify such things that benefit or can be hurtful to the organization, such as hacks and PSIs. Being in constant communication with case management can keep us in front of length of stay issues or readmission risks, value-based purchasing, and those types of things. Pulling in and knowing the importance of such departments such as dietary and nursing allow us to be able to build those queries that are necessary for the provider for that DRG assurance. Making sure that they understand what our role is and how we can work together to, again, achieve the ultimate goal for those patients. Of course, then there's coding. The biggest highlight in collaboration with coding that we have found in industry practice comes with that reconciliation piece. So again, once a patient is discharged, not ending the CDI's role there, but then pulling that back in full circle once coding professionals are finished with that case. What is the final DRG on that case? Does it match with what the CDI department came up with? If it doesn't match, why not? What are some areas of education that the coding professionals can lend to the CDI teams to make them more professional? We know that there is constant changes in coding clinics, coding guidelines, regulations, and all of those things. CDI teams need to rely on and use the coding professionals as those experts in that area to help us be more successful as we're concurrently reviewing the record. Maintaining and keeping on top of continuous collaboration. It's not just on a case-by-case basis, but then pulling that information all together. Are there any trends noted within the CDI and coding professional teams that we can then work on together to achieve that ultimate DRG assurance and trust and rely on getting to that next level for our program? Next, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine, who's going to start us off on data analysis and how to make it meaningful. Catherine, over to you.
Thank you, Allison. We're going to be delving into some of our reporting analytics and kind of getting into what steering reports could look like. So I think it's important to realize in this next section, we're going to be going over the utilization of vendor and software reports, how to leverage a data analyst, how to get your senior leadership and C-suite engagement in your CDI program, and then how to strategize based on your data analysis. So first thing that comes to mind is I have these reports, now what do I do with them? So there's a lot of different softwares and vendors out there. There's a lot of data available. So I think what's important is to realize what's your current CDI mission and purpose? You know, where are you at with your program? What stage are you at? Do you have a new program that you're working with and just getting started? Perhaps your program is undergoing restructuring. Or maybe your program is stable and you're looking at more advanced avenues in order to expand. So ensuring accurate interpretation. You know, this will help determine the types of data that you need to focus on. What types of data do you have available to you? Do you have a resource that you can utilize and ask questions? You know, if you receive data and reports, how often do you get these? Do they come on a monthly, quarterly, yearly basis? And then how do you utilize this information? You know, the ability to access and run reports is also important. Do you have the ability to run your own reports? Do you have limited access? And who all has access that you can leverage those people? And ensuring accurate interpretation. So what does this mean, and how do I utilize these reports? Data availability. Professionally trained analysts dedicated to a CDI program. We don't generally see that everywhere. We are very lucky that we do have that with some of our clients. Kind of delving into getting into what types of data that you have and available. So though you may have the CDI software available to you, but perhaps you also need to look at, does your hospital organization also have a reporting software that you can also utilize for your steering reports? So you might be looking into your decision support or local revenue cycle IT person. You can also be looking at financial data and reports to see if you can utilize those as well. Also looking into how can you use this data, analyze it, and strategize. Being able to target areas for review, especially when you're doing deep dives in cases, are also important. And then also this provides findings and educational needs that maybe your department needs, maybe you need to talk with your ancillary departments, and then also providers. And of course, getting that engagement with your C-suite and your senior leadership. So Allison touched briefly on steering meetings, and I'm going to be delving in a little bit deeper on the importance. So how often should you have steering meetings? Should they be monthly, quarterly? That really depends on where you're at with your CDI program and the type of engagement that you would like to have with your senior C-suite. So does your leadership have a good understanding of what exactly CDI is and what the initiatives are? Do they understand the reports and what information and data your program is trying to convey? And how much support or intervention do you need from your senior leadership? And what kind of relationship can you garner from that? And then having a firm understanding of what your CDI program needs will determine how often you should meet with your CDI leadership or your senior leadership. So reporting program data, this is very imperative. Something we've learned along the way is definitely know your audience. So we've gone through several versions of our steering report. And, it kind of just starts with when you have a new program, you're really focusing on a lot of your program KPIs, what's going on from a department level. But coming in and you're trying to engage your senior leadership, your C-suite, your CEO, your CFO, what type of information and data are they interested in? Are they, if you're sending out all these KPIs, are they going to be their eyes glossed over and they're like, I don't have any idea what exactly you're trying to tell me and how that impacts to my work here at the hospital? So definitely knowing who your audience is important. When you're bringing up your reports, listening to the questions they provide you and ask, especially if they're repeated or maybe somebody else actually asks the same questions. All of that information is things you can be refocusing and maybe you need to include in your steering report. Provided added value into your information. So what kind of data does your senior leaders actually request? We got a lot of information on CMI, and though we do communicate this all the time that CDI is not ultimately responsible for the CMI, but they seem to like to make that correlation. We do provide that information, but we need to spin it to how we can impact, but that we're not ultimately responsible. And then, of course, the evolution of steering meetings. So when we talk about pre-steering reports, so we do have a basic foundation. And again, you're going to see an evolution of these steering reports, especially if you're constant communication back to your leadership. But something to go along with pre-steering is when we're going through and we're making sure the data is accurate, that it's correct, that the reports look clean, and they'll have clear understanding of what exactly you're trying to convey. And then you're also wanting to go in there, and we're going to go into this a little further about trends, but you're also wanting to go in there and be like, how can I anticipate questions that they might have? That's a very important process. So not only are you anticipating their questions, you should be able to have answers to provide back to them in real time in the meeting. If you don't have a clear-cut answer, that's the opportune time to say, not just say, I don't know, it's I'm going to have to delve back into that further and I'll get back to you. And then, of course, the process of change. Again, you're going to have to see this real engagement along with your C-suite while you're building this. If you have a bigger organization with multiple facilities, you might get different requests based on service lines, based on initiatives that they're going on with the facility. Maybe you actually have a new CDI team, and maybe they do want more KPIs reported out on how the progress is. Maybe they're only reviewing one pair, and they're just wanting to know what the process is. Definitely tailor it, but still have those core reports out. So engaging with your CDI, C-suite, this is things that we've actually learned along the way. And a part of our current CDI steering report includes CMI impact. So we do provide a report that shows the CMI impact on only CDI reviewed accounts, that shows the CMI pre and post intervention. We do provide the top 20 DRGs. Now, we do provide this at an institutional level and not just CDI. We did find that it's very confusing for them if you're trying to show them two different sets of data. So we do it at an institutional level. Any barriers that we might have experienced throughout the month that we've had any issues with. So an example of that would be provider engagement. It's obviously a big one. So any issues that we might have developed we'll actually bring forth to this meeting. And then, of course, there's a physician scorecard. Now, we do have a larger version of this, but for steering, we do tailor it down to basically those providers that are actively engaged, maybe have a high volume of no responses. We do put that on the steering report just to make note of it. And then, of course, the steering report, monthly report out. So currently, if you have an advanced program, more than likely you're not going to be meeting with your leadership on a monthly basis. However, I think it's still important to report this information out on a monthly basis. So, writing a written summary along with the report, trying to anticipate their questions, I think it helps keep that continued engagement. And then also, even though you don't have a formal meeting, being able to just, hey, I sent that report out to you. Just want to let you know, please take your time, take a look. I'm available for questions. So even though you're not having that face-to-face in a meeting type setting, you're still getting in front of your leadership. So kind of going a little bit more into KPIs and the actual reporting itself. So this is an example of something we provide. And of course, CDI is not all about financials, but your CFO and your CEO, they love financials. So we do provide that on our steering report. So this here is an example of something that we provide that is a rolling calendar year. So they can check, June 2018 to June 2019. This also does a year-to-date. So it provides you what we currently have recouped as a CDI program from January to June, so they can see that as well. Now, where it becomes a little bit more difficult to truly show the financial impact is normally based on CDI software. It's usually only displaying the financial difference on MS-DRG changes, especially when there's limited based on the availability to load various DRG blended rates. So again, it's not even showing the SOI ROM impact, but we still provide this information because they still enjoy reviewing this. All right, so this kind of goes back to your traditional CDI KPIs. Now, your program, again, might have several KPIs. I know, a lot of our CDI teams do. However, they might not know or want to know everything that we monitor, track, and trend. So some of the core things that we do provide to our leadership team that they know why we're doing this, they can see what's going on, is our review rate, our general query rate, and then our provider response rate. So as you can see, it's also on a rolling calendar year. And then you can see the track and trend. And then if they would have any questions like how can we have a lower volume this month compared to next month, some of those might be some of the questions. So you can look at census, maybe it's patient type. Maybe we had a really high volume of dehydration and chest pain and there's not limited query opportunities. That's going to change some of your dynamic when you're reporting out your KPIs. So this is kind of, again, a display of how we provide the institutional CMI variance. So this is an example of a facility that we actually manage of the institutional CMI. So I think it's important to note CDI does not own the CMI. However, our senior leadership requested this information. We used to only provide CDI, only Medicare CMIs. Got very confusing to the point where we weren't really optimizing everything that we could be providing in these steering meetings. So now we just use the institutional. We still provide a lot of feedback on this. So you can see, there's a downward flux on this past month. So, they like to ask questions on, why are we seeing this decrease? Well, the census went down. We had some orthopedic physicians that decided to go on vacation, so our surgery volume's down. And those are some of the things that we research and already have preemptive questions that we know they're going to ask, and we already have those available during these meetings. All right, so this is actually an example of a physician scorecard, just like a small piece of it that we provide during our steering meetings. As you can see, we do provide the total clarifications and the amount of no responses based out of that volume. And then it tells you the percentage of no responses for that specific provider. We also provide the relative weights on what exactly we asked, and then the potential financial shift. So this is something that we kept getting a response from our CFOs. Generally, you don't find a whole lot of dedicated physician advisors that are there, just for the CDI program. They're usually sharing the role with different departments within the hospital. So going in with that, we really leverage the CFO along with our physician advisor and display, hey, we get these queries out there. They're not really responding. It's the same physician month after month after month. Can you please try to do some interventions? We've exhausted all the interventions that we currently do. So this kind of helps. I mean, we have a display. They're seeing the amount of dollars that could potentially missed. That kind of helps get the more involvement, more engagement from your C-suite. So in this case, I mean, there are several providers on there, but there's really not a whole lot of responses. So if you have a current organization where you're having a lot of trouble with your no responses, something you might want to look at is maybe I just want to do the top 10 to work on, or the top 5 to bring to your steering meeting to really communicate, look at the volume of these. Or maybe you do get like a 100% response rate, but where you're having trouble with is agreement rate. I'm asking the same physician, but he's saying unable to determine or not agreed on all of his queries. That's something you can actually provide also on your provider response back to your leadership. We're doing all of this stuff. We've already leveraged the physician advisor. I think we need some more support from our leadership. Can you please help me with this barrier? All right, so this is the top 20 DRG summary report that we like to provide. This is also on the institutional level. We find that it kind of helps correlate with the CMI, especially if you're seeing a lower CMI. It helps when you put in even those DRGs that you may not review. So as you can see on this one, a lot of vaginal deliveries. We have a cesarean in there. Normally these aren't DRGs that our CDI review. So though we present this When we research and provide more data back, we're actually looking at any service line changes. So if we're looking through here, and as you can see, there's DRG 470. Maybe last month you saw it in the top 2 spot, and all of a sudden it's now further down in your top 20. Why is that? Is the volume the same? So did we have 39 cases this previous month? Or maybe we actually had more than that, and we just didn't schedule as many this month, but we're going to catch up next month. Doing further research along with that. And then, of course, you're going to have your seasonal DRGs. Spring, summer, you're going to get your cellulitis, heat stroke, dehydration. And fall, winter, you're going to see your sepsis, pneumonia, influenza. Us seeing these accounts constantly, we're the experts on this stuff. So when they ask us, why aren't we seeing pneumonia? We were like that back in the fall. Well, it's because a lot of times it's seasonal. Also going into provider query responses, and I've touched on this and on the previous slide. So, are we asking questions out there to help move some of these lower weighted DRGs, but the providers aren't giving us the appropriate responses? Are they constantly saying, I don't agree, I don't understand, unknown? Are they completely ignoring them and you're getting a lot of no responses? That kind of helps impact your top 20 DRGs and something you can also report out to your leadership. And then, of course, Allison's already touched on this earlier. So going in the deep dives, doing case audits. And we used to do a lot of this, deep dives and case reviews retrospectively, at month end. And it would take us a good week. So that's like taking our leader from doing leadership with our staff and then doing these deep dives of accounts. So we found that actually doing it concurrently throughout the month actually helps unburden them at the end of the month. So some of the things that we might look at for doing deep dives is we're going to look at, DRG 392, which is a DRG that CDI reviews. And, of course, they have a low relative weight. Now, some of those can be really hard to turn over. So what we might do is instead of reviewing every single one of those accounts, we're going to look at the length of stay. Are they out of their length of stay? Was this, something we need to look at? Maybe we weren't admitting them correctly. But we're going to review these accounts to see if there's any missed query opportunities. Could we have potentially moved this DRG? Or we could go into the cardiac arrhythmias, especially with just the CC. Okay, what's going on with these? How come we weren't able to move these? Was there any missed query opportunities? Did we have any inaccurate coding? All of these things we document, and we can kind of report out. We don't get specific, but sometimes we can rebill accounts, and we'll let them know. Any educational finds while we're doing this, we provide back to the individual CDS, or if we're actually seeing a trend where we're seeing it with like your whole CDI team, maybe they need group education. And then we also provide that to our coders as well. If we're missing it, then maybe coding's missing it as well, or maybe it's how it was documented, maybe it should have been clarified better. So, we really like our education. And that's kind of, we're educating our facility and our coders, CDI, throughout the month to the end of the month. And then we provide this information to help educate our senior leadership and to provide their engagement. So thank you for listening to our presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Becker to continue on to our Q&A section.
Thank you, Catherine and Allison, for that fantastic presentation. We will now begin today's question and answer session. Please submit any questions you have by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your dashboard. We will try to get through as many questions as we have time for. We have a lot of great engagement from our audience coming in today, and so I'll begin with a question from someone who is wondering about the steering report, clinical documentation, financial impact of 2018 through 2019 slide. The question is about that slide, and it is, how do you calculate the financial impact? What's the equation, and is this built into your software? And so, Allison and Catherine, I'll pose that to you, whoever wants to jump on that.
Sure. I'll give Katie a break from talking, and I'll go ahead and take it. This is Allison. So thank you for that question. Yes, most CDI softwares do have a built-in calculation that converts the DRG shift in order to report out those financials. The DRG financial reporting impact is strictly from moving from one DRG into another based on the blended rate that's uploaded into that software system. So it's only based on the DRG shift alone. It doesn't calculate into any charges or outliers or anything like that. It's merely based on those DRG shifts.
Thanks, Allison. That's really helpful for understanding. Another audience member is curious about what are some of the actions being taken for those providers who are not responding or consistently responding with unable to determine, unknown, disagree, etc. in their messaging?
Sure. Thank you for asking. This is Allison again. I think it's really important to identify why they aren't responding. Are they not up to speed with what the CDI department's focus is and what our ultimate goal is? Do they not understand the questions that are being asked? Since most CDI departments are not providers by nature, and we have to follow a regulatory process in the way we approach and ask providers questions. We cannot lead them into answering a certain way or direct them into documenting a way that we would anticipate into the record. So most queries are posed in the form of a multiple choice question in which a provider gets to choose from those choices. If he or she is unable to determine exactly what's being asked, then that's an educational find that needs to be taken back to that provider. Sometimes that can be done on a one-on-one basis just with that provider. Or again, as Catherine talked about, if we're looking at trends within a facility, and if you're noticing something like that across the facility, maybe it would be more beneficial to attack as a full educational process with key providers. Also then, you can engage your physician champion. As I touched on in the leadership hierarchy, sometimes there's a gap between the CDI department itself and working with providers, whereas a peer-to-peer, using our physician champion or physician advisor to then have those peer-to-peer conversations that can speak the lingo of CDI as well as get on the level of the providers in order to be able to articulate clearly the ultimate goal of the question being asked. You can also see in some of these cases that there's just a lack of engagement overall. I think, as Catherine talked about in the monthly reporting to C-suite administration, being able to highlight, if it's necessary, over and over again where our gaps are. CDI departments are in place, and have a certain process to work through, and ultimately have to rely on the physician's documentation to achieve that goal. If there's a lack of engagement, where can the C-suite administration step in and help out with? We've seen at some facilities where provider response rates and those types of things are built into provider contracting within that facility. Incentivizing such providers in maintaining a certain set of response rates. But when you talk about unable to determine, unknown, or just plain disagree, those kind of fall out of that category. So being able to identify, is there an educational gap that we can work on with that provider on? Do they not understand the ultimate goal of the CDI department and what they're attempting to achieve? Or if there is an ultimate lack of engagement, then where can we lean on with our C-suite administration to be able to push a little bit more? I think the worst thing that can happen within a CDI department is that they avoid then attempting to engage that provider. That then doesn't show then the C-suite administration where some of those opportunities are and where we have opportunities for that continued success.
Excellent. Thank you so much for all of that valuable insight, Allison. The next question is going to be about responses. And an audience member is curious, what would be considered a successful percentage of responses? Is there a gold standard?
Hi, this is Katie, and I'll address that question. So I think it really depends on where your program's at and the software that you utilize, but generally we recommend at least 90% of a provider response rate. However, if you have a more advanced program and maybe you've been around for a little while, we do actually stretch that to 95 to 100%. And as you can see, like when we had the previous slide with our KPIs, we actually had like a 98% response rate on there. So we do try to get as many as we can, and that's why we kind of recommend a hybrid program where you're still doing that face-to-face with your physicians. But kind of going into that as well, we still hold to the 90% just because you have a lot of organizations out there that have a lot of new providers, locums, residents. So all that has to be taken into consideration. So I guess our gold standard would be about 90%.
Excellent. And another audience member is curious about calculating financials. They're wondering, are the financials solely based on the Curie dollar number improvement?
Right, that's Katie. So when we do our financial recruitment slide, it is the variance of the query impact, so exactly what the query asks for. So if we have the DRG and you ask for the, like an NCC, we're taking the financial impact of what the difference is, and that's how we report out our financial impact on queries. Unfortunately, we haven't found the best way to even show more impact, and we're very limited in the software that's utilized out there. We're definitely looking and researching for other ways to do that. That's why we actually leverage a lot of different vendor reports out there to kind of showcase our impact. And that's why we actually like our CMI pre and post impact better than what the query impact is.
Great. Thank you for answering that question. And another audience member is curious, is there a recommended number of CDI specialists per adjusted admission?
This is Allison. There's a lot of literature out there that will support varied CDI specialists per admission volume. So I guess it ultimately is determined by what you are looking to have your CDI specialist do. CDI is continuing to grow, getting to HCC, capture, and those types of things, value-based purchasing, second-level reviews. All of that will ultimately determine the volume of CDI specialists that are necessary for your program. If you're looking at it just at a DRG focus and concurrent case review, DRG assurance, and those types of things, you will see out there that between, Katie, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say between 1 FTE per 1,700 to 1,900 annual discharges is usually where those lie.
Actually, I think it varies actually a little bit more than that, recent literature. So I've actually seen 1 to 1,400 to 1 to 2,500. So it's a huge, vast difference out there. And a lot of it's actually based on the software being utilized and where you're at with your CDI program, whether you're just looking at the basics or maybe you're looking at secondary reviews, mortality, and risk adjustment. That factors into how they calculate those.
That's an excellent question from the audience, and thank you both, Catherine and Allison, for weighing in there. And Catherine, I know you spoke, Allison, you were speaking about building relationships with coding departments. Are there any other recommendations you have for building these strong relationships within the coding department?
Sure. Thank you for asking. Yes, I think it's making sure that you're out there. I think historically, being out on the hospital facility units, you see that nurses are kind of those key players, along with case management is usually out and about in the facility. Making sure that your CDI teams are seen as part of that care continuum and asking the questions and not just hiding behind, their concurrent reviews and that sort of thing. Where are they identifying opportunities with engagement? Is that, are there various daily or weekly involvement meetings that they can be involved in? One of the things that we see in some of our facilities, they're called quality flow rounds, in which there's a provider and administration and case management is involved in, will kind of highlight some of those outlier encounters that are within the facility. Is there an opportunity for a CDI specialist to be involved in those and be able to add input on what they are seeing with those cases as they're reviewing them concurrently? Getting in front of quality, keeping them in the loop concurrently on any quality finds that may or may not ultimately play out with that case, but providing a heads up will be seen as beneficial and will showcase how CDI are in and out of the records and can lend additional advice or input on cases that they are seeing.
And to follow up with that, I'll pose this question to Allison and Catherine, which one of you would like to address it. What are some ways to be more proactive with CDI teams and their metrics?
Sure, this is Allison. So I think, going back to kind of those, highlighting those daily, weekly, and monthly expectations and activities can really pull back and being proactive instead of reactive. Catherine touched on going through moving concurrent audits for DRG assurance to the front end is also important as well. That way, at the same time, when we are pulling them monthly reports, we're already on top of. We already know what those trends are and what we're seeing. We've been working with the leadership from the supervisor level to the manager level to the director level on what's being seen across the industry or across the organization, to highlight kind of where we are. Catherine then talked about, once we then do pull those monthly reports, anticipating what the C-suite is going to ask for. Being able to highlight if there's an adjustment in that CMI or a downward trend, are we able to articulate why that is? Was there a provider that was out, on vacation that usually lended to an increased CMI? Is there a change in volume? Summer months tend to, especially in the Ohio area, tends to decrease overall volume as opposed to winter months when you see the more sick cases being admitted to the hospital. Any changes in service lines, being in front of those. If we are losing a cardiovascular surgeon, being able to know that in advance and working with the site administration and teams and just keeping your ear to the ground to be able to say, okay, Dr. Smith is no longer going to be with the organization. How is that in turn going to impact the overall metrics for the organization? Is there an opportunity for CDI to focus then elsewhere, or are they looking at bringing back then that service line that we can focus on? In turn, adding service lines also play into that as well. If I am going to add, a high-level specialty, let's say neuroendovascular surgery or specialized cardiovascular cases such as Impellas and those sorts of things, how will those in turn play into the overall metrics for the institution? They may not specifically be CDI driven, but just being aware and being able to have that conversation with your site administration speaks volumes to your impact for the facility.
Right. And in terms of keeping your ears to the ground and really listening what's going on, how often should these teams be meeting with your site CFO?
So this is Katie. I've kind of touched on this a little bit. So if you're first just really starting out with working with your leadership, we recommend doing it monthly. We actually even have sites that maybe need a little bit more help or their CFOs are really engaged, and they actually meet twice a month. So we'll actually meet the second week of the month, and then we'll actually do a formal steering at the end of the month. It really depends on where you're at. what kind of engagement they want, and what are they looking for you. But generally, we recommend monthly.
Absolutely. And we have time for one more audience question today. And an audience member is curious, do you have formalized documents or forms that you use for your staff meetings and touching base?
Sure, this is Allison. Go ahead, Katie.
So Allison kind of touched on this. So when we talked about the weekly and the monthly, so we do actually have formal documents. When we meet with our staff, we meet on a monthly basis, and we do have formalized documents where we say, this is what your productivity is. We did our case audits. These are our findings. This is where you're at. This is kind of where your query rate is. Now, we don't have productivity based on query rate, but it's just to let them know. And then if they want to compare, see where they're at, maybe it's a service line that they're focusing and working on, then we just provide the information back. It helps us monitor, make sure they're getting everything that they need from us, and then also holding them accountable.
Excellent. I want to thank the audience for these fantastic questions today. Allison or Catherine, do you have any final thoughts?
This is Allison. We hope that this was a little bit helpful in really, again, taking your CDI program to the next level. Keeping on top of and always looking for opportunities for improvement is important in the healthcare industry.
Well, great. And that is all the time that we have time for today. So I want to thank Allison and Catherine for their excellent presentation and Ensemble Health Partners for sponsoring today's webinar. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars.